funding. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted on the DHCD VERP website after we're done today. Just one housekeeping item before I introduce our team at DHCD. We'll be asking you to please submit your questions in the chat, the Google Meet chat, if you're able to. If you're joining by phone and are unable to use that chat function, we will have several pauses throughout this presentation where we'll stop talking and we can take your questions in those transition periods. I'll introduce myself and then turn it over to my two colleagues also on the VERP team. My name is Senta Leslie, and I'm the Associate Director of Eviction Prevention for DHCD. I direct both, in addition to the VERP pilot, I also direct the statewide rent relief program. And Gabby, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gabby Vasquez. I'm the program administrator for the VERP program.
Good morning. My name's Elizabeth Spate. I'm the Eviction Prevention Policy Analyst on the VERP team, and I'm excited to be with you all this morning.
Thanks, Gabby and Elizabeth. So we'll jump right into some of the background of how we got here. In 2016, Matthew Desmond, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the book Evicted, revealed that Virginia is home to 5 of the top 10 highest evicting cities in the country. Those include Richmond, Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, and Chesapeake. It's important to note that Petersburg also ranks as the second highest evicting city for a mid-sized locality. So in 2020, our General Assembly passed the first year of VERP funding, and that focused on stabilizing individual households through a variety of flexible financial supports. Our second year of funding, which began in 2021, had a stronger focus on addressing this issue at the systemic level. And this is when we began requiring coordination with local courts and incentivizing regional collective impact efforts. We're here today to talk about our third year of funding, so you'll of course hear many more details about that. So the real purpose of VERP, I always say the P is for pilot, sometimes I would say the P is for pandemic, but it's for pilot. It focuses on addressing the eviction crisis at a systemic level. We understand that with approximately $3 million a year, our biggest impact will be in making systems changes rather than household by household individual interventions. So you'll learn more about who we require you have at the table for this coordinated systems approach. And we'll award up to $2.45 million in funds for the calendar year of 2023. And it's important to note that for the first time, we'll administer these grants on a 2-year funding cycle. So this first year, which covers calendar year 2023, grants will be made through a competitive application process. And those grants will be renewed based on performance, compliance, and of course our availability of funds for the 2024 calendar year. So as I mentioned, the goals of this year more than ever before are to address the systemic issues, the root causes of Virginia's eviction crisis, We are casting a vision, and for those of you who have worked in the homelessness prevention space, this framework might sound familiar, but we're casting a vision of Virginia becoming a place where evictions are rare, their impact is brief, and the experience is humane. So that will take a systems change approach to achieve. And we want to ultimately coordinate at a statewide level an eviction prevention and diversion system. A note about geographic targeting. So any locality in the Commonwealth is welcome to apply. These funds are available statewide. What the localities that you see listed on this slide here will be given a scoring preference because of their particularly high rates of eviction and/or the General Assembly's inclusion of these localities in the budget language. So while we will only fund one grantee per locality, more than one application, you're welcome. You do not have to coordinate. So we can have 2 applications from Richmond. We'll accept 2 applications from Richmond, for example, but would only fund 1. We are not requiring a local match in order to apply for this program. However, applications that do include a match, either in kind or cash, will be given a scoring preference per the budget language passed by the General Assembly. We want to underscore, because this is a change from the first year, that local COVID or other emergency resources can count towards a local match commitment. It's very important. We often see applicants who indicate that they have match funding, but then do not provide proof of that match funding. So I really want to underscore that in order to receive the scoring preference, you must include documentation of the match. So we're talking a lot about systems change, and that can be a buzzword that is often goes undefined. So I just want to take a moment and share with you what we mean by systems change. So number one, we're talking about addressing the causes rather than the symptoms of an issue. Systemic change will require changes to policies and practices that underpin that root cause that we're talking about, and requires collaborating with a wide network of players. I want to take a minute and just give some examples of what we mean by, or what it could look like, what systems change could look like in the eviction space. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but something to get you thinking. So one example is specialty eviction dockets. In some localities, eviction hearings might be heard Monday through Friday or not on a set schedule. A specialty eviction docket that ensures a consistent day or days of the week would allow for court navigation services to be available. That's one example. Another example is changes to various court processes that would result in more information being made available regarding services. It might mean some enhanced mediation so that there's a step before, a step where the landlord and tenant can negotiate before getting to court. You're hearing me talk a lot about partnerships, but I would underscore that those would be necessary in order to give people who have experienced an eviction the opportunity to rebuild a positive rental history. And another final example is partnerships that would result in, all tenants having guaranteed legal representation. So when you get to eviction court, most landlords have representation and most tenants do not. Virginia is not a right to counsel state. So in civil matters, there's no right to an attorney, but partnerships with either your local legal aid or your local or the statewide bar association, or even just, for those of you that have fundraisers on your staff or volunteer coordinators, pulling together a network of volunteer pro bono attorneys that are there for your clients and ensure that your clients have representation. So those are just a few examples of what systems change could look like. We're eager to see your creative ideas and examples. Let's see. I can't tell what number slide we are on. Gabby, is this me or you? Eviction prevention.
Sorry. Yeah, this one is you until we get to the questions.
Okay, thank you. So in this round of funding, we are requiring that grantees provide both prevention and diversion resources and services. So we want to take a minute to define what we mean. And this is different from the homelessness prevention space. So we define eviction prevention services as those that take place before a household receives an unlawful detainer. So before any formal court action. And that could look like some short-term financial assistance, some case management, mediation, many other things. Eviction diversion happens after a household has been issued an unlawful detainer. So after the formal court intervention. And those diversion services could include assisting landlords and tenants with negotiating payment plans, ensuring that there's legal aid representation, for example. Just a note about who's eligible to apply. So local units of government, nonprofits, PDCs, academic institutions may apply, but only as a partner with a local nonprofit or local unit of government. And all applicants must be registered in DHCD's CAM system without any outstanding issues. It's important to note that public housing authorities are no longer eligible to apply for VERP funding. So the requirements, as I mentioned, are that you're registered in our CAM system. Relationships between all of the partnerships that we're requiring are clearly articulated. Please note that we will allow grantees to sub-grant with other organizations, but any of those agreements, be they MOUs or other formal agreements, must be submitted with the application. And we have extended the grant application period in order to allow you all with more time to formalize those partnerships before you submit your applications. And we cannot enter into contracts with any agencies that have outstanding audit findings, IRS findings, or other DHCD monitoring findings or other compliance issues. So we've reached our first moment of pausing for questions, and I have not been monitoring the chat, but I see there are some here. Oh, no, there aren't. Was
We
someone?
have someone in the queue, Zariah Hutchins. Do you want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question? Okay, maybe it was an accident. If anyone else has a question, or we can keep on rolling.
And Soraya, if you're muted or having any technical difficulties, there will be, other pauses in the presentation for you to ask your question. I see a couple popping up. One from Fred Prevent. Homelessness prevention can also work with households that are in the court process for evictions. Is there any further distinction between eviction diversion and homelessness prevention? That's a really great question, and one that we will touch on in the next round of slides. Excuse me. So let's hold on that, and after the next series of slides, if you still have questions about that, please let us know. Are these, and I see Travis's question, are these funds available to tax credit properties? So Travis, let me know if I'm not answering your question here. What I want to say is that we cannot grant to a landlord. So we cannot provide grant funding to someone who will then use that money to pay themselves. However, the resources available through VERP would certainly be available to households who live in tax credit properties. Their landlord just couldn't be a grantee of ours. Travis, is that what you were getting at? Okay. And Renee, how do individuals apply for assistance? That will be how one of the things that our grantees decide. And you'll also hear a little bit more about our expectations for prioritization in the next round of slides that Gabby will be leading. And Travis, so yes, an individual household would approach the successful VERP grantee to apply for financial or other forms of assistance, keeping in mind that our real focus here is about influencing the system that the household is interacting with rather than the household themselves. We want to maintain that flexible financial assistance, but that's an important distinction for everyone to understand. Okay, well, for the sake of time, let's keep moving and know that we have a couple. Oh, Christine, do you have your hand raised?
Okay. I have had health issues and I have not been able to work, and I lost my job in March, and now because I haven't been able to work, I'm trying, but I have been having health issues, but they're getting better. So I'm trying to find another job. Haven't been able to find one yet. Now, eviction for non-payment of rent. And I haven't been able to get financial assistance from anybody, not from the county, friends, family, nobody. I did not have any case management to connect my household with housing stabilization resources or mediation between me and my landlord. They knew about my situation, but they never communicated with me. And then all of a sudden, last Saturday, I got an eviction notice in my mail. And now I have to prepare for the court date on August 15th. And I don't know where to go from here. I am working with legal aid, Virginia Legal Aid.
Good. Christine, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Are you able to see the chat?
Yeah.
So I just dropped my personal email there. Please feel free to reach out to me so that I can help you one-on-one. This webinar is for organizations that will apply for funding, but as an individual who's in need of assistance, I want to support you. So
Okay.
let's connect one-on-one.
Thank you.
Through email. Thank you. So Gabby, do you want to lead the next several slides, and then we'll have another opportunity to pause for questions.
Yes, thank you, Santa. So I'm just going to start off with some changes from last year's round of VERP. So a program design requirement change is that the programs are required to provide prevention, diversion, and court navigation services. This is a change from the last round where you didn't have to provide both prevention and diversion. You didn't have to use VERP funding for that. If a grantee is not providing either prevention or diversion services directly, they should subgrant with another entity to provide those services. More information about subgrantees and all of this can be found in the program guidelines. And if you so choose to have a subgrantee for these different parts of the program, the primary grantee is still responsible for all data collection and coordination of services. An eligible activities change, moving costs and application fees are no longer allowable expenses under the new round of VERP. This is because due to the limited amount of funds, an attempt to make the best use of funding, it has been decided that spending funds on moving expenses and application fees is important, but it does not align with preventing evictions and keeping people in their homes, though it's very needed to help move them to new situations. The next change is regarding the funding level available. VERP funding should not duplicate existing resources and must be coordinated with other available funding sources. Funds may not be used to replace mainstream resources. So this is touching on that question earlier of with the homeless prevention money that's available. So DHCD encourages grantees to coordinate with VERP services with homeless service providers in order to avoid duplication of funds or services. For example, the targeted homeless prevention funds. So we don't want VERP to duplicate VERP funds to be used for things that there are already other funds that can provide those. So coordinating up those services and funds. The next change is this is not another change, but for applicants that have received prior VERP funding, it is expected that the grantees will amend their current policies and procedures to comply with the current VERP systems approach and program guidelines. Applicants that have received prior VERP funding should describe in their pilot program design how prior VERP funds built and strengthened their current eviction prevention and diversion program system, as well as how current VERP funds will further enhance their system to reduce evictions. So now getting into the details of the pilot program design, the activities that are included, and we'll elaborate on them in the next slides, but eviction prevention assistance, eviction diversion assistance, initiative and our partnerships to promote systems change, court navigation, outreach and resource navigation, language access, lived experience, coordination with partners and stakeholders, and referral protocols to eligible applicants to SNAP, TANF, WIC, and LIHEAP and Medicaid. So going further into the details, this is a very text-heavy portion, and feel free to ask any questions on these. But because we're sending these out, this was also meant to be sort of a resource. So I'm not going to read every single sentence, but for initiatives and or partnerships that promote systems change, just focusing on creating partnerships that increase affordable housing options in local communities, working with courts to be part of the eviction prevention response, increasing jobs, and are some of the examples for that eligible activity. Court navigation. So this is a change from the last round where court navigation was an optional piece, and now we are requiring it as a part of the program design. So all successful VERP grantees must include a court navigation program. The purpose of this program is to increase communications between judges and eviction prevention and diversion staff to assist tenants with navigating the court system, inform tenants about other resources, and the court navigator programs should include on-site staff at courthouses to assist tenants. This has been a really great part of our program design that we've seen great success with in VERP 2.0. So we're really excited to see how this could continue to grow in future rounds of VERP. So it is expected that grantees will have existing partnerships with courts and legal aid providers through MOUs prior to submitting those VERP applications, and we would need to have all those MOUs in place prior to the application for it to be scored as already having those partnerships. VERP policies and procedures should clearly outline how court navigation activities will be coordinated with other VERP activities, and all VERP policies and procedures will be approved by DHCD prior to implementing the program, and there's more details about Court Navigator in the program guidelines. Continuing on into the other eligible activities, there's outreach and resource navigation. Grantee must proactively seek out households at risk of eviction. Language access should be prioritized in program design and outreach strategies. Lived experience programs must provide opportunity for an individual with lived experience, someone who is previously evicted or has experienced housing instability, to be involved in the development, implementation, and evaluation of the local VERP project. Coordination with partners and stakeholders. Grantees must actively ensure there is coordination among service providers and stakeholders, and referrals. That grantees are expected to develop referral protocols with their local DSS offices in order to refer eligible applicants to benefits. The local VERP advisory committee. Each grantee is required to have significant coordination through a local advisory committee. The advisory committee must include representatives of the following: a local COC, workforce development, local DSS, legal aid, representative of the district court and or bar association. This is a change. Previous VERP grantees have expressed difficulty with having a member of the district court. Some people have had a representative of district court, but we wanted to include bar association as a representative of bar association as a backup option. A representative of a public housing authority, representative of associations representing landlords such as realtors or apartment management associations, housing counseling agency / program representative, conflict resolution, person with lived experience of eviction or housing insecurity, organizations representing communities of color, particularly Black communities, organizations with experience serving Spanish speakers and other non-English groups speakers based on demographic needs of your own communities. What is the need there? Tenant advocacy group, if that's present in your community, and centers for independent living. Coordinating these advisory committees has been some of the most successful, great results of the VERP program, and just bringing a lot of help. People in the room can help really create systems change. Continuing on into eligible activities. So housing financial assistance could be short-term rent assistance or ongoing rent assistance. Stabilization support services. So these are things like if your car breaks down and you can't get to your job, then VERP can help pay for that car repair, so that way you can pay your rent that month, or just these non-traditional ways to help stabilize the applicant or the client. Prevention activities, which would be that case management, capacity building. Diversion activities would be where the court navigation falls under, legal expenses, mediation, transportation to court, outreach and engagement, advertising fees, travel, in administrative costs, which are limited to 5% of the total award. Total award is the final amount spent by the grantee, and it is not the same as the initial contracted amount. All other funds must be spent in order to receive the entire contracted admin amount. Participant eligibility. So DHD requires grantees to use an eligibility form designed to identify households most at risk of housing instability and to have clear policies and procedures that specify household eligibility and the program's approach to meeting their needs. We provide a template eligibility form if you for grantees to use. If you choose to create your own eligibility form, these are the factors that must be included, which is a household headed by a person of color, single female head of household, number of recent moves within the past 12 months, the age of head of household, and whether the children are present in the home, involvement of child services or foster care, non-leaseholder status, domestic violence, frequency of law enforcement involvement at the unit, tenants living in large multifamily properties, and a household's housing cost burden. VERP funding can also only be used to serve individuals whose household income is at or below 80% of the area median income, or AMI. Housing first approach, a lot of you might be familiar with this already, but we just wanted to really underline that grantees are expected to follow a housing first approach across their entire program. So for those who are not familiar, this approach is guided by the understanding that people need basic necessities like food and a place to live before attending to anything less critical, such as getting a job, budgeting properly, or attending substance use issues. The VERP assessment tools from the last slide should use a housing first approach and should not screen out applicants solely based on a lack of household income. So with case management and things that can be really, we don't want, it's really important to get somebody in a house. You really can't focus on the rest of the things that you also have going on. And so we really don't want these assessment tools to screen people out. And we got through that pretty quickly. So any questions on that part? I know I said a lot of things, and I am happy to go back to any slide. This will also be sent out. So is there a cap on number of months or payments for eligible households? That we do, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Elizabeth, but we do not have one in our guidelines, but that would be, and I'm sorry, there's construction outside, but that will be up to the program, your specific program itself and your program guidelines.
That's correct, Gabby.
Of course. Okay, well, if you think of any, please put them in the chat. Funding will be to agencies, not like RP.
Gabby, I'm sorry to interrupt. I did just realize I misspoke. The guidelines do indicate that financial assistance would be capped at 6 months. So sorry for misspeaking. And Denise, if I can, I think I understand what you're asking. So, right, we are granting funds directly to eligible organizations. This is, we will not be using Gov2Go in order to administer the 3rd and 4th years of VERP. Those are two separate programs and entities. And Pam, I see your question, how long will you have to utilize them? The grant period will run, the first year will run through calendar year 2023. So you'll have January through December. And then as mentioned, based on performance and funding, remaining funds available, we will renew for a second year, and you'll have the calendar year 2024 to spend those. Chris, I see your question. Do we have a maximum award amount in mind? We're not dictating that to applicants. There's a little less than $3 million a year for us to grant out. And we would look to all of you to tell us the story of what's needed. But we do want to underscore that with the amount of funding we have available, we will not be able to fund the entirety of your efforts. So, the matching grant funds would give you some scoring preference, and then ensuring that you're coordinating but not duplicating with the other resources available in your community. And I see the question about how do we apply for this. So the next round of slides will walk you through the how to apply information in a more detailed and granular level.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that portion of the presentation. If you all have other questions, feel free to keep putting them in the chat, even if they're not directly related to what I'm talking about, because like we mentioned, if we do have time at the end or run out of time, we'll be answering those questions in an applicant FAQ. So data collection and evaluation in Virginia, as well as across the country, we do have a lack of understanding of evictions and data showing kind of, exactly the need, the average amount of assistance needed, things like that. Grantees will work closely with DHCD through the CAMS biannual reports, and also with the program evaluator to develop and implement a local or regional process to collect eviction data. We do use a mix of quantitative and qualitative information to help us better understand how we can improve the VERP program moving forward, because this is a pilot. And it is expected that grantees will participate with the evaluator in data collection, interviews, etc., so that we can successfully evaluate and better understand our program. Next slide. So for reporting, VERP grantees, as I mentioned, are going to be required to submit biannual reports. So because we're transitioning to, a one-year competitive application with a one-year renewal depending on funding, there'll be 4 reports in this grant cycle. And, this includes demographic information, report activities, project participant data, spending. So, if you're working with sub-grantees, it's, as we mentioned, it's ultimately expected that the grantee is responsible for submitting those reports. So if you're working with sub-grantees and other organizations to help you implement your program, the grantee that we're contracting with is the one that's going to need to submit on behalf of the whole program. So just an overview of the application process. Again, a lot of this information on the slides is here so that you can refer back to it, but we're also happy to answer any questions you may have. Applications need to be submitted through CAM's online application system by 11:59 on September 16th. It's important to try to submit, a little earlier, because after 5 p.m. we won't be able to answer questions. So just make sure, that you have that date in mind and can submit your application. This is the link to Access CAMS, which is the system that you would use to apply. Once you go on our website and click Access CAMS, you'd go to Program Search, click on the Apply, and you'll see Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot in the drop-down, and then you can hit Go and then Apply. Just some tips for using CAMS. Make sure you're frequently saving work, especially as we get closer to that September 16th deadline. You know, things can happen, you know, sometimes computers have updates and things like that. So just make sure that you're frequently saving your work so that you don't lose any of what you've worked on. We do recommend using Google Chrome, and also, you know, in the spirit of saving, you can also work in Microsoft Word and then copy and paste that information into the text boxes. It's important to note that the CAMS application will only accommodate text responses. So if you have, you know, graphics, tables, or charts, like let's say for demonstrating the need in your community, you want to upload a presentation that you did for your city council or your board or something like that, that should be submitted as a separate attachment because it's not going to show up in the narrative section of CAMS. And you can just see here, these are just screenshots of what the application will look like. You know, you'll put your organization. If you go to program budget, this is where you'll put the line items of activities that are within your program. And as we mentioned, you know, we're making sure with VERP 3 that grantees are providing prevention, diversion, and court navigation. You know, the budget narrative part is just as important as a narrative question. We do consider the budget and how you break down your expenses the same as, you know, we would consider your pilot program design. So, you know, as Senta mentioned, we do have a limited amount of funds. And so when you're deciding how much you're requesting and, you know, how much is going towards like financial assistance stabilization, any data that you can use to like justify your response in your budget narrative is going to go a long way to helping us understand why these funds are needed for your community. And the other funding section to the right of the DHCD request, that's where you would put in your matching dollars if you have those. So, and the narrative information, I think there's 12 or so. They're listed in the program guidelines, but this is where you will respond to the narrative questions that are in the program guidelines document. And again, like as much detail, as much, you know, explanation of why these funds are needed for your community is helpful. The attachment section, this is where you can upload the required attachments like your procedures, MOUs. If you are doing your own eligibility or intake form, this is where you can upload those. We do know that some of these forms might be subject to change. And, you know, if you are awarded a grant, we have you update and resubmit these forms, but it is important for us to see what your policies and procedures would look like as we're scoring your application. And you can see that there's a section for optional where you can put additional uploads that you might want to help with your application. The list here is the required attachments. In the program guidelines, there's more information about those and if you have any questions about those, but those are the list of the required attachments for the application. Once you know, it's important to note that multiple people can work on, edit, and review your application. Your application is going to save as incomplete in the system until you hit submit, and you can, you know, return to your application until that September 16th deadline. Once the application is submitted, the status will change from incomplete to pending. And as DHCDs, you know, reviewing the applications, you might see, you know, DHCD review or something like that, but it will then go from pending to accepted or denied once we make our funding decisions. And we do anticipate having funding announcements around like the late fall, like November or so. Great. So this is the evaluative criteria that we're going to be using to score your application. This is also in the program guidelines. Need, your pre-pandemic rate of evictions, whether you're in a targeted community, any COVID data that you might have, later on in this slide, we do have some links of data resources that you can use to help make the case for your community. We'll also be looking at approach. So this is, how you plan to administer the grant. So, how you're going to include those with lived experience, what your policies and procedures are like, collaboration between the courts and service providers. And then the third thing that we're looking at is capacity, right? So, you might have a community that has a great need and you have this great idea, but we're also going to be evaluating your organization's capacity to actually implement and administer the grant. This could be, experience serving low-income households, providing financial assistance, using systems change, etc. It's important to note that in order to be considered for funding, you need to score at least 60 points. So applications that don't meet that threshold will not be considered for funding. And then in cases where the number of organizations that meet that threshold exceeds the amount of funding available, we'll be prioritizing your approach and capacity score, the combined total of those scores. On the next slide, we have the additional preference points. Partnering with your local government or local housing authority, we would require a letter of commitment or an MOU in order to receive that preference. If your program has a regional scope, so if you're serving more than one locality, you will also get a preference. We give 5 points for a local match. And then a program that serves more than one priority area would also receive a scoring preference. So on this slide, when we send the presentation out, you'll be able to click the links. But here are a couple of data resources that can help you as you're targeting your program, thinking about your program design and answering that need question in the application. You can click the links and look at those resources as kind of a starting point if you have questions about data available for how to do that. Cool. And on this last slide, if you do have technical CAMS questions, you can email the CAMS help desk. As I mentioned, don't wait until the last minute. Our business hours are 9 to 5, so that's when people are available to answer questions. And then if you have application questions, feel free to reach out to Senta Leslie, who's our Associate Director of Eviction and Prevention. So I believe that that's it. So, we have about 9 minutes if there are any other questions. I see some in the chat, so feel free. I can start reading those and then if people have other questions that they want to ask. It seems like Robbie for the advisory committee, does a separate organization have to fill each position or can a single organization fill multiple? As long as you're describing what that organization does, there's an opportunity for that in the narrative questions. That's fine for an organization to fill multiple parts. So many households receiving RRP are still at risk of eviction, many waiting for those funds to come through. Does previous assistance affect current eligibility for VERP?
No, having received funding from the rent relief program does not affect someone's eligibility for VERP. Of course, we can't duplicate services, so you wouldn't be able to use both sources of funding for the same month and year for a tenant. And regarding folks who are still waiting for funds to come through, I just wanted to say that you're welcome to email me directly, and I can help triage those applications. And then Chris, I see your question, would a separate local rental relief program count as a match? Yes, it could. It absolutely could. What are the chances of receiving funds for a COC that is not on the list of the localities that have a preference? We have some current grantees that are not representing the localities that are eligible for preference points. So, you know, that's a preference scoring, but not a requirement. So you're welcome to apply, and all applications will be evaluated, you know, based on their merit and compliance. Frederick, I see your question. Is there an email for individual assistance? I will put my email in the chat again. If you are an individual that's in need of assistance, I'm happy to provide you with the resources currently available in your locality. And Christine, I'm just reading your note. Thank you. We appreciate your kind words, and please feel free to reach out to me directly. Okay, well, those are all of the questions that we had in the chat. Again, this recorded webinar and the PowerPoint slides will be on the VERP homepage on DHCD's website. I think Elizabeth had dropped that link in the chat earlier. If you want to drop it again, Elizabeth. And please feel free to, we'll also post the questions that were asked and other frequently asked questions. And we are always here to answer any additional questions that you may have. Thank you all so much for your interest and your passion for assisting your neighbors. We look forward to partnering with you.